It was just a crumpled napkin tossed away after a quick bite to eat. No one could have guessed that this insignificant scrap of paper, smeared with mustard and ketchup, would one day solve a brutal murder that had haunted an Iowa town for 25 years. A napkin, something so ordinary, so forgettable. But in the hands of forensic scientists, it became the key to unlocking a mystery that had gone unsolved for decades. For years, the case sat in the archives of West Liberty, Iowa, cold, forgotten. A crime with no answers, a killer walking free. But in 2018, detectives picked up that discarded napkin, tested it for DNA, and uncovered a secret that had been buried for over 2 decades. A secret that changed everything. October 10th, 1993. West Liberty, Iowa was the kind of town where people didn't lock their doors. It was small, tight-knit. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where crime was rare, where murder was unthinkable. But that morning, something shattered the town's sense of security forever. Inside his rural home, Corey Wieneke's lifeless body lay crumpled near his bed. His skull had been savagely bludgeoned, struck over and over with a force so brutal that police could barely recognize his face. Blood was everywhere on the floor, on the walls, soaking into the carpet. Whoever had killed Corey wanted to make sure he was dead. And yet, something about the scene didn't make sense. There was no sign of a struggle. No broken windows, no forced entry. His wallet was still there. His car keys. Nothing had been stolen. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. His fiancée was the one who found him. The moment she stepped inside, the silence felt wrong, thick, unnatural. When she called out his name and heard nothing, her stomach twisted in fear. Then she saw him. Her screams shattered the morning stillness. By the time first responders arrived, it was already too late. Corey had been dead for hours. The coroner would later confirm it. He had been murdered sometime in the early morning hours. But why? Who would want Corey Wieneke dead? And why had they chosen such a brutal way to kill him? As investigators stood over the body, they had no idea that this case would haunt them for decades and that the answer had already been left behind, waiting to be found in the most unexpected place. Corey Wieneke had a way of making people feel at home. At 35, he was a bartender at Wink's Tap, a local bar where everyone knew his name. With his boyish charm, quick wit, and friendly nature, he wasn't just a bartender. He was the guy people came to for a laugh, a drink, or just a good conversation. But Corey had bigger dreams. He wanted to own his own bar one day. He had talked about it for years, saving up, planning, imagining what it would be like to have a place of his own. His fiancée, who had been with him for years, supported him completely. They were planning a future together. So when she walked into their home that morning and found Corey's lifeless body on the floor, that future was instantly obliterated. Her screams cut through the morning air, a sound so raw and full of anguish that neighbors later said they would never forget it. Corey was gone. But his murder was just the beginning of a case that would twist and turn in ways no one could have imagined. The moment authorities stepped inside Corey's home, it was clear this was a brutal, rage-filled attack. His skull had been crushed, the blows delivered with terrifying force. This wasn't a quick, clean murder. Someone had beaten him to death over and over, until there was no life left in him. Detectives searched the house for clues. The murder weapon was missing. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a break-in. His wallet was still in his pocket, his car keys untouched. This wasn't a burglary. This was personal. Investigators combed through Corey's life. They talked to his family, his friends, the regulars at the bar where he worked. Who would want him dead? The last person to see him alive was his fiancée. But her alibi was solid. She had been at work that morning miles away with multiple witnesses to confirm it. That meant someone else had been in that house, someone who had a reason to kill. In a small town like West Liberty, secrets don't stay buried for long. As detectives dug deeper into Corey Wieneke's life, a name kept coming up in hushed conversations: Annette Cahill. She wasn't just anyone. She was a local woman with a strong personality, outspoken, intense. More importantly, she had a history with Corey. Word around town suggested they had been more than just friends. Annette was reportedly having an affair with Corey, a relationship that had been passionate but also volatile. Investigators brought her in for questioning. Had she seen Corey on the night of his murder? Yes, she admitted she had been with him. But when asked if she had anything to do with his death, absolutely not. She insisted she had nothing to hide, no reason to hurt Corey. She claimed she had last seen him alive and well when she left. Detectives had their suspicions, but there was a problem: no physical evidence tied her to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA, no murder weapon. They had nothing to hold her on. And just like that, Annette Cahill walked free. For weeks, investigators chased down leads, trying to piece together Corey Wieneke's final hours. They looked at his friends, his co-workers, his fiancée, his former lovers, but nothing led to a solid suspect. And then the case stalled. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. West Liberty moved on. Corey Wieneke became another cold case, his name slowly fading into the stacks of unsolved murders. But then in 2017, something happened. A woman stepped forward with a chilling confession. She told police that back in 1993, she had been just a teenager when she overheard something terrifying. Annette Cahill admitting to murder. Detectives were stunned. For 25 years, Corey Wieneke's case had remained frozen in time, unsolved, untouched. But now a woman was claiming she had heard the killer confess. The witness, who had been a teenager in 1993, told investigators that Annette Cahill had once admitted to killing Corey in a fit of rage. According to the witness, Annette had been furious the night before Corey's murder. The two had argued, screamed at each other over another woman in Corey's life. Was this what had sparked the brutal attack? Had jealousy turned to murder? It was enough to reopen the case. Detectives went back to the evidence, searching for something, anything that could physically tie Annette to the crime. But there was nothing. No fingerprints, no blood, no hair fibers, no DNA. They had a statement, but no hard proof. If they wanted a conviction, they needed something solid. And that's when they took a risk. Detectives had one mission: get Annette Cahill's DNA. But it had to be done without her knowing. For months, they watched her from a distance, waiting for an opportunity. And then one day, they got their chance. Annette stopped for a snack, a hot dog. She ate, wiped her mouth with a napkin, then tossed it into the trash. That was it. The moment she walked away, detectives moved in. They retrieved the napkin stained with saliva, holding microscopic traces of her DNA, and sent it to the forensic lab. If Annette Cahill had been in Corey Wieneke's home the night of his murder, this napkin might finally prove it. And when the results came back, everything changed. The forensic lab worked quickly, running tests on the discarded napkin. If Annette Cahill had anything to do with Corey Wieneke's murder, her DNA needed to be at the crime scene. And then the results came back. A match. Annette Cahill's DNA was found at the scene of the crime. It was the break detectives had been waiting for. For 25 years, the case had been nothing more than theory and speculation. But now they had something undeniable scientific proof that placed Annette in Corey's home. Investigators wasted no time. The moment the results came in, they moved to make an arrest. Annette had no idea that in a single moment of carelessness, she had sealed her fate. May 31st, 2018. A knock at the door. Annette Cahill opened it to find detectives standing on her front porch. For more than 2 decades, she had lived her life without consequence, free from suspicion, free from justice. But now the past had caught up with her. That napkin, something so ordinary, so forgettable, had done what years of investigation couldn't. The evidence was clear, and this time Annette wasn't walking away. She was charged with second-degree murder. The trial that followed would finally uncover the truth behind Corey Wieneke's brutal killing. But even as the courtroom filled with attorneys, witnesses, and forensic experts, one question remained. Would the jury believe she was guilty? 2019. After 25 years, Corey Wieneke's case had finally made it to court. Annette Cahill sat in the defendant's chair, her face expressionless as prosecutors laid out their case. They painted a picture of jealousy and rage. The night before Corey was killed, Annette had been furious. Witnesses testified that she and Corey had a heated argument, a fight about his involvement with other women. Annette had been known for her fiery temper, and the prosecution argued that she had snapped. Had she picked up a blunt object in a fit of rage and beaten Corey to death? Had her jealousy turned to murder? The evidence was damning, but Annette's defense team was ready to fight back. Annette's attorneys didn't back down. They attacked the prosecution's case, pointing out its glaring weaknesses. There was no murder weapon. No eyewitnesses had seen Annette at Corey's home when he was killed. Yes, her DNA had been found at the crime scene, but she had already admitted to being there the night before. That wasn't proof that she had murdered Corey. The strongest evidence against Annette was a decades-old memory, a witness who claimed to have overheard her confess 25 years earlier. How reliable could that memory be? The defense called it speculation, not proof. Was the jury convinced? Or was there something more, a single piece of evidence that would push them toward a verdict? The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. For 25 years, Corey Wieneke's murder had remained a mystery. For decades, Annette Cahill had lived a normal life, free from consequences. But now, everything came down to this moment. The jury had spent hours deliberating, going over the arguments, the evidence, the hot dog napkin that changed everything. Then they returned. The judge asked for the verdict. The courtroom fell silent. Guilty. Annette Cahill was convicted of second-degree murder. For the first time in decades, Corey Wieneke's family had an answer. Annette, now in her 50s, had spent more than half her life hiding a deadly secret. And in the end, it wasn't a witness, a confession, or even a motive that unraveled it. It was a crumpled napkin. For the town of West Liberty, Iowa, justice had been a long time coming. Corey Wieneke's family had spent years haunted by unanswered questions. His fiancée, his friends, his loved ones, none of them had ever truly moved on. Now, with a conviction, there was finally closure. But the case left behind unsettling questions. Had Annette really acted alone? What had truly happened in Corey's home that night? And most disturbing of all, if that napkin had never been thrown away, would Annette Cahill have ever been caught? This case proved one chilling fact: no crime is ever truly forgotten. For 25 years, Corey Wieneke's murder remained an unsolved mystery, buried beneath stacks of cold case files. Leads had dried up, witnesses had faded into the past, and the killer had walked free, believing she had escaped justice. But forensic science had other plans. In the 90s, DNA analysis was still in its infancy. The technology simply wasn't there to match a suspect based on microscopic evidence. But science evolves. A simple, crumpled napkin, something Annette Cahill never thought twice about, became the key to her downfall. It's a reminder that in the modern world, murderers are running out of places to hide. Even the smallest trace, a hair, a drop of blood, a single fingerprint can come back to haunt them decades later. If authorities had access to today's forensic techniques in the 90s, would Annette Cahill have been caught years earlier? It's a disturbing question. Corey Wieneke's family waited 25 years for answers. 2.5 decades of grief, of uncertainty, of wondering if his killer would ever be brought to justice. But what if the technology had been available back then? Would Corey's loved ones have been spared the decades of pain? Would Annette have spent most of her life behind bars instead of walking free? It's an unsettling thought, because for every case solved by modern forensic breakthroughs, there are countless others still waiting for their own miracle of science. And the terrifying reality: some killers may still be out there believing they got away with it. For all the answers that forensic science provided in this case, one major mystery remains unsolved: the murder weapon was never found. Corey Wieneke was bludgeoned to death with brutal force, his skull shattered from multiple blows. But what object was used to deliver those fatal strikes? Investigators searched his home, the surrounding property, even nearby fields and wooded areas. Nothing. No bloodied baseball bat, no heavy metal object, no hammer, no crowbar, no blunt instrument that could have been the weapon. It simply disappeared. Could Annette Cahill have disposed of it so well that it was never recovered? Or could it still be out there somewhere, waiting to be found? And if it ever was, would it reveal something we don't yet know? Could it contain fingerprints or DNA from someone other than Annette? Because that leads to another haunting question. Annette Cahill was convicted of Corey Wieneke's murder. The jury believed she acted alone. But was she? Despite the guilty verdict, some still have doubts. Corey was a strong man, athletic, physically capable. The attack was ferocious, overwhelming, a savage beating that showed no hesitation. Could Annette have done this by herself? Or was there someone else in that house that night? Someone who never came forward. There was no forced entry, no struggle. Corey had let someone in. That much was clear. What if there was a second person, a silent accomplice, someone who helped cover up the crime and has lived in the shadows all these years? If that's true, then is Corey's case truly closed? Or is another murderer still out there, walking free? Corey Wieneke's murder was solved in the most unexpected way, not by a hidden confession, a new witness, or a lucky break. It was a napkin, something so insignificant, so forgettable that Annette Cahill never thought twice about tossing it into the trash. And yet, that single careless action unraveled a secret she had kept for 25 years. It makes you wonder how many other killers have walked free simply because the right evidence was never found. For decades, Corey's case sat cold, buried beneath stacks of unsolved crimes. No leads, no suspects with enough proof to convict. It wasn't until a simple DNA test on a piece of garbage, no less, that detectives were able to bring his killer to justice. But what about the cases where that piece of evidence never turns up? How many murderers are still out there, living normal lives simply because they never made the same careless mistake Annette did? How many families are still waiting for answers, hoping that one day a tiny overlooked clue will surface and change everything? And the most unsettling thought of all, how many more hot dog napkins are still out there waiting to be found? A scrap of paper, A cigarette butt, a discarded straw, something so small it seems meaningless, but could hold the key to unlocking another horrifying crime. This case proved that justice is patient. It waits in forgotten evidence bags, in DNA databases, in samples that haven't been tested yet. One day, another cold case will be cracked, and another killer will learn the same lesson Annette Cahill did: no crime stays buried forever. The case of Corey Wieneke is officially closed. Annette Cahill is behind bars serving her sentence. The jury made its decision. The evidence sealed her fate. But there's one question we can't ignore. If she had never tossed that napkin, would she have ever been caught? Think about it. Without that napkin, detectives had nothing. A cold case, an old witness statement, a missing murder weapon. That's all they had for 25 years. Would Corey's family still be waiting for justice if Annette had been just a little more careful? And even more chilling, how many others are out there living their lives thinking they got away with murder, walking among us, smiling at neighbors, tucking their children into bed, thinking their secrets will never come to light. But as Corey Wieneke's case proved, all it takes is one mistake, one trace of DNA, one forgotten piece of evidence, and justice will come knocking.